You know when you think your team is set in stone, best possible 11 picked and all that jazz, and then a random guy that you signed to be a backup at best basically decides to take that personally and become the greatest player in history. Okay, maybe that's overstating it a little bit, but what a turn up for the books. We're currently dealing with the largest transfer budget we've had at any stage in this save right now, as well as something that is just kind of plain bizarre, which I can't tell you about till later in the video because of spoilers, but trust me, it's weird. So join us over on stream after you've caught up over here to get all the goodies. The VODs are on the second channel, it's linked in the description, you know the drill. So we came into season 14 of Building a Nation with Sirens of Malta, off the back of our best ever performance in the Champions League, where we reached the quarterfinals for the first time in the club's history. And this year we were full of ambition, knowing that this was the first year that we had 5 teams in Europe, and that means 4 friends to potentially help us or to potentially drag us down like the big anchor in the sea. Apologies for the longer gap between this and the most recent recap video. I spent basically an entire week ill, which means of course no streams, so we're a little behind on that sort of stuff. I'm still not back to 100%, but I'm doing my best. This year has actually been somewhat light in terms of incoming transfers, as we seem to have spent a lot of our time almost by accident signing players that are actually first team ready. I know, unheard of in one of my saves, I realise. But nevertheless, we've also raked in nearly £35 million in outgoing transfers, which we need to run you through a couple of those first, particularly as they kind of lay the pathway for what I'm going to show you with the transfers in. The first out was Abdou Ndoye, which is in a way kind of sad. I'd hoped for more. He's 24 years old now, and the fact is, over the last couple of seasons, he's kind of found his game time absolutely minimized because of the emergence, obviously, of Vida firstly, then us moving away from playing a DM, which means that he couldn't even operate there, and then the emergence of someone like Evtim Krastev, who kind of took away his backup spot as he was just a lot younger and seemed to have a higher ceiling. So we've been looking to move Abdou on for a little while, and then in the January transfer window, in the throes, once it had actually shut on our side of things, Benfica came in, they offered us £11.5 million, and for a club like us, whose values are still better this year, I might say, the base values have certainly jumped up by 2 to 3x, which is lovely, but that is not the main out, and I think the main out is probably likely to surprise you, but hear me out, there is logic in our madness. The biggest out was Gonçalo Freitas to Milan for £21 million, and there's a lot to this, but essentially he has only been at the club for like, I think, well, a year and a half at this point, because he was a January sale again on the same day as Ndoye, but we'd kind of already lined up a replacement for him, so it wasn't like the end of the world. But the thing with Freitas was this: most of our squad is fairly happy to stay once we do through the usual processes, whereas Gonçalo Freitas, without fail, in every single window, would throw a hissy fit and then have bad morale for 2 months out of the year. Or it's actually more like 4 months out of the year. That's quite a lot of playing time. And I realise he's only 28, but we did feel that if we could find someone who was nearly on his level, a bit younger, lower wages, and maybe we could find a way to cash in, and that is exactly what we have done. 21 million might be a little bit low, but we just felt with the constant interest in him and the constant him complaining, basically, it was the best we were going to get at this point. So when Milan came in with 21 million pounds, we decided to bite their hand off, get some money, and considering the price we paid for his replacement, you'll understand why I feel like long term this is the right move for us, particularly as we sign him for free and we've made a 21 million pound profit on the transfer, and that's the kind of money that goes a long way for a club like Sirens and really stops us from having any more Tony Sunday situations like last season. So now to the ins, because I believe we've done some genuinely excellent business this year with regards to strengthening the first team and the fringes of it. But the first player in actually isn't one of them. It's Tebogo Zwane, a South African right wing back, and this was sort of one of those signings that I sometimes find these players, we'll get the original scout report through when they're like sometimes 16, 17, depending on how our team reports work, and they'll come through and be like, oh, it's a 5-star player, and I'm like, oh, very interesting. And I always add those guys to the shortlist because we can't sign them yet. Usually they won't even discuss terms until they're 18, sometimes even older, but I like to keep an eye on their development. And when the opportunity came around that we were actually able to sign Tebogo for £275,000, I figured with the attributes he had, he'd be an okay signing for us, with the idea, of course, to throw him into the loan farm and see him develop. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened over the course of this year. My hope is that in this summer we can. He doesn't appear to have the potential that we thought, but for £275,000, these are the exact type of players that I target for loan farm. Next up was actually our biggest outlay of the entire summer, Radek Markovic. Now, basically, we found a 19-year-old who had 4 caps, I believe it was actually only 3 caps at the time for the Czech Republic, and that usually piques your interest. Now, was 9.25 too much? I would say probably so, but when you look at his attributes, he's extremely well-rounded, and for 19 years old, you can hardly really say no to a player of this kind of quality, particularly as we were worried about the fact that we may potentially lose Gonzalo Diaz at the end of this season. Spoiler alert, we have in fact, or will be, about to lose Gonzalo Diaz at the end of this season. He was mostly brought in to bring that balance to the midfield, especially as he is essentially able to play both of the midfield roles that we like to use. He can pass, his vision is okay, but more importantly, he's got decent work rate, okay tackling, his marking and positioning are not too shabby either. He basically allows us to do both things in the midfield, and it's great to have a utility man like that who's actually made 25 appearances this year. A lot of money? Sure, but I still think, like, he's probably still kind of worth it. Next was Jefferson Pinedo, a Colombian centre-back who we picked up on a free transfer because he was being released by Atlético Nacional. And really, you don't say no in FM24 when you see a player who's a centre-back with 16 heading. It's unheard of. Now, unfortunately, he's already annoyed at me. I actually can't remember the exact reason why he's annoyed at me. Oh yes, sorry, I do remember. The moment he joined us, basically, he complained and wanted to go back to Colombia, having just signed a 4-year contract with the club. I then said, yes, no, free, go back on your leave of absence. And then he said, no, I must immediately leave. It's like, cool. What do you want me to do about it? Next up, ironically, is a player who has the exact same problem. This is Jorge Barbosa, a 29-year-old centre-back. Now, we picked him up on free again. He was released by Argentinos Juniors, and we picked up a few of these guys because, if nothing else, we can flip them for a profit. Now, he, again, after being at the club, I think less than a month, decided that he wanted to go back to Argentina as well. Now, he did actually go on a leave of absence, then came back and is still basically complaining the entire time. Such is life with these things. But for a 29-year-old, I think we can flip him and get, honestly, next transfer window, I reckon we can get 5 million for him. As much as his value is lower here, if we can drum up some interest, I think we can bump that up. It's a shame though, because he actually has really nice attributes, but they are nothing compared to a player that we accidentally stumbled on later in the window. Don't know if he's the next one I'm going to show you though. Just stay tuned. He isn't, but we have got Fred Lasso. One cap for Colombia. His actual name is Federico Lasso, but come on, you can't find a player called that and not change his name. Now, you might be thinking, oh God, is he the goalkeeper replacement for Freitas? No, he is not. He's brought in solely to be a backup. He was brought in to be a backup to Freitas, actually, at the time. Really solid option as a goalkeeper. And for £1.1 million, it was always a nice little punt to take on a guy. I think he's a decent keeper, probably unlikely to ever be a first-team starter, given the guy that I'm going to show you soon. But I feel like for a nice backup, we've got a lot of goalkeepers at the moment, but I like him for 1.1 million, which just leaves us 2 more signings. The first of which I'm going to show you is our new, in theory, starting goalkeeper. And this is he. This is Jibril Fall. Now, ignoring the star ratings, especially when it comes to goalkeepers, I would say, is an absolute must for the most part. And we nearly excluded him until we actually looked at him in a direct comparison to Freitas. Now, he actually compares very, very favourably with Gonzalo Freitas. He's 4 years his junior, which I think means there's hopefully going to be a little bit more development time in there. But more importantly, we were able to pay Malmö 1.5 million for what I assume is the new Swedish international goalkeeper. I think he's just started getting those caps as the Sweden starter now. So that, to me, is a really good step up for us. Even if he's not quite on the level of Freitas right now, when you actually do a direct comparison, which I realise is difficult here, he is very, very close in almost every area to Gonzalo Freitas, and so far he's already made a brilliant impact for us in the few games that he has played. He's made 15 appearances for us so far. I've been very happy with his work, particularly on relatively low wages and £1.5 million. I mean, we basically made 20 million out of the Freitas deal and got a goalkeeper who's nearly as good, which just leaves us with one more signing. And that, for me, is probably the best signing we've made maybe in several seasons in terms of a first team player for us. So the story is that we found this guy a few years ago and kind of just ignored him because he was okay, but he didn't look like he had the highest potential ceiling despite having some okay attributes, and we felt that right now it wasn't what we needed. But over the last few years, he's developed quite nicely, and randomly, because I'd kept him on my shortlist, I think, or it might have been an agent offer as it goes, we were presented with the opportunity to sign him again, despite him being wanted by half of bloody Europe. So I did what anyone else would do, put a bid in, and boom. Ilan Jojanovic from Dinamo Zagreb for £4.7 million. I don't understand what happened here, especially when you look how quickly he signed for us. Do you know what? There's really no reason not to just throw out a bid like that. Sorry? What the hell just happened? Is he on the run from someone or something? Man was in my office, apparently. But the thing is, all I did was, I didn't even change the contract. All I did was offer him the thing that he said he wanted. It's not even deadline day. What on earth is that about? Look at the number of teams that want him. And he's just gone, fuck it, whatever. There was an 11-minute gap between me putting the contract offer to him and him accepting it, despite all the offers from elsewhere. I think probably he's the best centre-back at the club, immediately. And we've got some good centre-backs with Kadri and Paez. We're going to look at that a little bit later. But like, 16 jumping reach is fantastic, 6'2", 13 pace, so he's not the fastest, but like, come on. He's great on both feet, got great strength, his work rate is impeccable, 14 tackling is not bad, 16 heading as well on a defender. It's a dream come true. He's consistent. He's kind of everything I want out of a centre-back, and I've been very, very impressed with him, albeit only a half a season. I look forward to what he can do. 18 caps for Croatia already. I'm stunned that we were able to get him, not because of the price, because that was his release clause, but that once we triggered that, no other clubs put a bid in on him, despite being wanted by, like I said, half of the big European sides, and the fact that he didn't wait around, he just went straight to the Sirens' bosom. So welcome, Ilan. I think you're going to be a very good player for us over the coming years as we develop one mighty-ass backline. Now, for once, I have no tactical tweaks to tell you about this year, so we can jump straight into our form in the league. And this has been a weird one because we won the league by 25 points, which may be alarming at first, and I understand why, because, you know, when you see a huge gap, you're immediately thinking, Christ, that means that the gap between us and them has grown, and it has. However, I don't think that's just because they've got worse. I think we've just got better at a faster rate over the course of this year, with us really developing some of our first team guys into, in theory, some absolute monsters now. I think some of our players are now considered world-class talents by the game, which is absolutely outrageous at the stage we're at. So that alone is spectacular. That and the other clubs have kind of just been falling over each other this year. When you look at the gap between second place Sweetie and fifth place Birkirkara being only 3 points. Now, at one point, Sweetie were much closer to us. Then they kind of just balls it up towards the end. But they did get second and will play in the Champions League next year. Now, they do have some very good loanees at the club this year. And I think that's going to be one of the things that's really stepped them up. Having them hammering the perennial excellent Goodyear and then Birkirkara doing the business for us, I think makes the most sense. And I'm pretty happy with those teams being our European contenders. Sadly, Luton's 8-year stay in the top flight comes to an end. They actually only had one win with 24 matches played and actually won their last two to achieve absolutely nothing except relegation along with Valletta. Melita, for the second season in a row, don't really survive for the skin of their teeth, but they do look genuinely very bad, and it's actually a miracle that they've stayed up twice in a row. You might be getting a little sneak peek here at Uri Lahovi's season, and I'll give you a little clue. He is the breakout star of the year. We'll talk about him a little bit later because the things he's done this season are wild. As for the second tier, relatively straightforward. Nashar Lions and Tarshin Rainbows back up to the top flight. There was a spell where Sangwon, the semi-pro side down in fourth there, were actually occupying second for a good spell of this season, but in the end Tarshin were just too strong, and you can see they actually finished 12 points clear. Just couldn't see it over the line in the end. So it's a return to the top flight for the usual suspects. I suspect that's going to happen a lot. And all of that brings us on to European football. Now, last year we had the best year for us in terms of our personal success by reaching the quarterfinals of the Champions League. This year, though, we had 5 teams in Europe, which is always good because it gives you more opportunities for teams to win matches and get that progress, get into the group stages and whatnot. The downside, though, is if they do all shit the bed, it means that your points are just going to get divided by more because, of course, with 5 teams, we get the points diluted by 5 instead of 4, and that costs you a lot, particularly if they do poorly. Second round of qualifying, about as simple as they come. Away at Zrinjski Mostar, Juan Carlos Perez and Vida Zinha with the goals. Vida's been a very good goal-scoring threat this season, particularly as I predicted that this was the year that Krastev was going to overtake him. He has really stepped up in a way I didn't expect. Second leg, and it was the exact same story. 3-0 win, 6-0 on aggregate. Diaz, Roy Fleming and Vida Zinha with the goal. So another goal for Vida there. Now, you'll note the impact or the lack of Perez here. Unfortunately, this year for him has been plagued by injury. He managed to get through that first season despite being injury prone without any real injury troubles. This year it's been very much the opposite of that. But that then put us into a tie against Shamrock Rovers, which once again we were easily able to dispatch them. Ouattara, Vida with his 3rd goal in 3 matches, Padilla, and who was the other one in there? And it was Uri Lahovi, of course. More on him later to make it 5-1. Second leg was even better for us with a 5-0 victory. A hat-trick for Pierre Camger and Lend as well, one for Kwasi Awar, another one for Roy Fleming. I can't believe that Roy's actually getting game time for this team and playing well. It's really exciting to see. We'll talk about him a bit later as well, though. That then set up a tie in the playoff round against Celtic. 2 goals from Julian Palacio, of all people. Lots of goals being scored by wingbacks, you might notice, to give us a 2-0 victory in Glasgow. We could have had more. Like, this was a domination. Domination that then ironically dropped off a little bit in the second leg with a much worse performance that yielded more goals, because of course it did. Vida with another goal, Palacio with another goal, Paez with another goal, and Eric Nunez with a goal off the bench to make it 4-0, 6-0 on aggregate. You can really see that we look unfazed by any teams at this kind of quality. We're a definite regular Champions League group stage team from now on, which you'd expect from us at this stage. Now, last year's draw was very strange because we really got no easy games throughout the entire thing. This one was almost the opposite, where we got 4 insanely tough games and 4 games that you'd expect us to win, but always have that kind of banana skin ability about them. So let's dive in. And things did not start well away at Atletico. Semil Kilishoy and Harvey Elliott made it a 2-0 victory for Atletico. We just didn't really offer anything. There was some worries creeping in here at the lack of creativity, because obviously the whole point of this tactic is that, sure, we might lose 3-2, 4-2, 4-3 or whatever, but usually we create stuff, and we were just not looking great here. Atletico, though, are very good defensively in general terms, so that might explain it. And then we travelled away to Manchester City up next and also lost 2-0. Still no goals scored in the Champions League group stages. 2 defeats, Michael Holford and Chris Chalk with the goals for City. We didn't do bad defensively in this one, but again, just offered nothing. But it's tough to go to, Atletico and City in your first 2 games, which is why it got even worse for us when we then had to host Manchester United. And the results did not get any better. A 2-1 defeat at home to United. Vida did manage to bang yet another goal for us this season. I think that might have already been his 5th goal in the Champions League this year, but it was too strong. United were too good. We only had 1 shot on target in this game, and I was starting to get a little bit concerned. Now, we had a lot of rotation in the squad due to the sheer number of injuries, and the lack of Perez definitely didn't help us. But to lose our first 3 Champions League games, we knew that we needed at least 9 or 10 points just to qualify, and now we only had 5 games to go and get those points. But at least 3 of the tough games were out the way. But yeah, it didn't exactly bode well for us. Thankfully, things got a lot better for us against Dinamo Zagreb. 2 goals for Henry Watara, who'd done an excellent job filling in for Perez this season and has really had a sort of career revival this year in his absence. Padilla grabbed another, as did the ever-reliable Pierre Cameron Lend. 2 random goals in there for Dinamo Zagreb made it a little bit tighter than it needed to be, but we were vastly the better side. An injury to Freitas in this game, though, was a little bit of concern. What concerned us even more was this. One of the very winnable games. At home against Galatasaray, we put on an excellent performance and lost 3-1. Yeah, this is when the worries really started to creep in. Like, we looked good against Dinamo Zagreb, but to suddenly have lost 4 of your first 5 games in the Champions League was a massive concern, because we weren't even that bad in this game. This was just a normal sort of game that in any other day we'd probably win this 3-1 ourselves. It's just the luck wasn't on our side in a season where we kind of just needed a little bit of it. But worrying times, particularly as our next game was against Chelsea. But then lo and behold, the performance of the season so far. Goals from Aouar and Mateus Paez gave us a 2-1 victory over Chelsea, in which we came from behind. Like, when we went behind, we just thought, oh well, that's one of those things. But we played very well in this game, and I would say just about edged it and probably just about deserved the win statistically. And that's really saying something against a team like Chelsea in this save. So it was nice to show that we could still do it and actually play well. And all of a sudden, we had 2 games left, 6 points on the board, feeling pretty confident about our chances of at least getting up to 12 and qualifying. And then it got a little bit worse. As we went away to France and to Lyon, played reasonably okay, just couldn't seem to hit the target with any of our chances and got a 0-0 draw, leaving us with only 7 points going into the final match day. And I think, like last season, we got a little bit lucky. This year, we got a little bit unlucky. Looking at the matches in general, I feel like there's an argument to be made that we should have beaten Galatasaray and should have won this game as well. So it essentially dropped 5 points from where we should have been. So I don't think performance-wise it was actually as bad as it looked, but the points were certainly telling the story. Particularly against former goalkeeper Nathaniel Nwusu, who I've only just noticed put in a man-of-the-match performance, because of course he did. But that did mean that we had to go to FC Copenhagen in our final match day of the group, and a win was the only solution. A draw would not qualify us. We had to win. And boy did we. In fact, very, very comfortably in the end. Probably our best performance of the season in the Champions League. 2 goals for Juan Carlos Perez. Nice to have him back in the squad, and it does show what a difference he makes when he's actually on form and fit again. Pierre Cameron Lend, of course, added yet another for his tally to the season. Again, 3-0 victory overall, but it only took us to 10 points. Certainly one of our weaker performances in the Champions League, but as I said, there's an argument to be made that we could have had 15 easily, so it's not the end of the world. But it still wasn't emphatic, as we ended up in 21st place. 3 wins, 1 draw, and 4 defeats. Ended up actually qualifying as it happens. We could have got through with, no, we couldn't have got 9. So 8 points would not have been enough due to the goal difference situation we found ourselves in. So we did have to win that game. But sneaking through 21st is not exactly ideal for a team that's actually finished as high as, I think, 5th in previous seasons. It is what it is. We've still got that young team, so the consistency isn't quite there yet. They are starting to improve. I'm still happy with the progress. We're going to have seasons like this sometimes. And all of that set us up a Champions League knockout round against 12th place Milan, who only had 14 points themselves, but you know how these things go. Except we really bloody turned up in the home leg. Padilla and Kwasi Aouar gave us a 2-goal advantage going into that second half period, and then there was this turning point in the second half. I wish I had a clip of it, but I don't, and it's hard to find because it doesn't even result in a shot or anything. But essentially, we get a breakaway of 3-on-0 with Konagai bringing the ball up the pitch. He has a player, which I believe in this case was actually Henry Watara, running ahead of him. He's onside because he's in his own half. All he has to do, pass the ball down the pitch, and we probably score a goal for 3-0. Instead, he just keeps running with the ball, lets all the Milan defenders catch up with him before he's even left our own half, gets fouled, and nothing happens. Then seconds later, they go down the other end and score and make it 2-1. Now, they did deserve. They probably could have won this game as it goes, but the fact that we had that chance to probably put this game to bed at 3-0, we just knew that would end up coming back to bite us. And in the end, that is exactly what happened, as we went out on penalties to Milan in the end. We actually took the lead through Salim Kadri to go 3-1 up on aggregate in this game, but it didn't take long before they started turning things around with Caputo and Miola in there as well. But then they got a red card in this game. Fresneda was sent off as we were heading to extra time in here, and we thought, right, this is the chance. We can take them in extra time, try and create a little bit more, except we didn't really get a chance because no sooner had extra time started that Radek Markovic came off the bench and, well, he murked someone in the midfield for absolutely no reason, made it 10-a-side, and then our advantage completely was swept away. We were able to score a 120th minute equaliser in extra time through Pierre Cameron Lem, which was enough to send it to penalties, but during the penalty shootout, we just weren't able to quite do enough in the end, and we did once again fall at this hurdle. We're definitely getting better, and I could just see the team getting better year upon year, because that's the great thing about young players, they just get better. But it is still a real shame to fall at that hurdle yet again. So that then brings me to the rather strange thing that I mentioned earlier in the video. So there I am, getting us up to this point for this video, planning to go a little bit further ahead, and then I get the strangest notification, and that is this: Club World Cup draw. What? Why would we be interested in that? Oh, I see, because we're in the Club World Cup. How? Bearing in mind, the best we've ever done in the Champions League is come get knocked out in the quarterfinals last season. And if you're wondering how on earth a team that got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League once has somehow qualified for the Club World Cup, I was just as confused as you. But luckily, General Genius, Hadrian, friend of the channel, has figured it out for us. I'm going to put the graphic that he made me on screen right now to explain it. But essentially, because obviously it's massively expanded at this point, European countries are only allowed to have 2 teams max that can qualify for the tournament from that nation. And as a result, it then works down the coefficient charts after that. So you'll see on the chart that I'm showing you now, because we're technically 17th on the coefficient charts ourselves, we were actually given a spot into the Club World Cup. Now, what's even weirder is the fact that 28th place Galatasaray, because of the way this all works, and it's also done on the nation's coefficient as well, I believe, also managed to qualify for the Club World Cup despite being 28th ranked. So yes, we get to play Club World Cup football this summer despite having never got past the quarterfinal of the Champions League. FM's weird sometimes. So we're going to play against Barcelona, Mamelodi Sundowns and River Plate. What a group. So that's enough about that. Let's talk about the other Maltese sides. Because with us hitting par this year, which is what I would say we kind of basically did, we needed help from our friends, but at least this year we had 4 of those friends instead of 3. Our first side were Birkirkara, who entered the Conference League at the second round, the only team we actually have in the second round at this point, and they did actually get a little stroke of luck, being drawn against a Kazakhstan second-tier team called Turan Turkestan, who had somehow bluffed their way to the Kazakh Cup, we believe, and that's how they ended up in the Conference League somehow. But as a result of that, a 7-0 victory was pretty much, well, they only beat them 1-0 away, which is a little bit shocking, but they did get a 7-0 victory and progressed to the next round. Unfortunately, wish they could have got a bit of that luck as far as the draws go later in the rounds, where they drew Hajduk Split of Croatia. In the end, it was a relatively easy defeat with a 2-1 victory, 2-1 defeat and a 4-1 defeat in there as well to bow out in the third round. But at least they got us some coefficient points with the 2 wins against the Kazakhs. Next up, we have Balsan Youth, who came in at that exact same round, but the draw luck was once again not there as they were knocked out by Maccabi Tel Aviv 5-4, which is fairly solid as far as showing where they rank in these kind of things. But yet again, it just feels like this. Bear in mind, it's not like we're just randomly getting these, well, we are randomly getting these draws, but there is a hell of a lot of bad luck in here. When you look at the other teams that are in these rounds, when they're not even seeded at this point, there's so many teams that they would just absolutely annihilate, but we always seem to get usually Turkish sides, generally speaking, but it's crazy. But that unfortunately left us turning straight to the teams who would need to drop down, and the first of those was Sweetie, who got their first taste of Europa League football, where they met old enemies of the channel, Istanbul Başakşehir, because we seem to find one of our teams plays them almost every single season, and the result is almost always the same. This was a 3-2 defeat. They did at least get the draw at home, but they were bumped straight down into the third round of qualifying for the Conference League. It's a shame, but at least they were able to match them nearly, and they did at least get a soft landing in the Conference League against Valur Reykjavik of Iceland. A 2-0 victory and a 3-1 victory saw them sail through to the playoff round with a 5-1 aggregate win, which is great. Great news, into the playoff round, 1 tie away from the promised land, and who did they draw? That's right, Istanbul Başakşehir. Again, for the second time this season, they drew them. Actually a joke at this point, but such is life, and the result was exactly what you'd expect. 2-1 defeats both home and away. Ironically, they actually played a lot better than they did in the Europa League tie, but sadly it was still not enough, and they were knocked out by the same side twice in the same season within 6 matches. Yeah, this has happened to me once before with HJK, and it's the reason that they're a bit of a meme enemy on the channel, and I think we have to add Istanbul Başakşehir to that same list. I can't believe it's happened twice in the same year. The odds have really not been in our favour this season, which left us just with one team to talk about, and that is Hamrun, who this year got to start in the Champions League qualifying rounds, admittedly in the second round where there's literally only 4 teams in it, so it was always going to be tough. And tough it proved to be as they drew Besiktas of Turkey. Now, a 5-1 defeat on aggregate is pretty bad, but it's also what you'd kind of expect from there. At least getting that point, the coefficient point for the home draw is something. Now, the only other team in here that they really could have got that they might have had a chance against was Aberdeen. Certainly not as good as Besiktas, but I still think they probably would have lost them too. But that's fine. We wanted them down, dropping into the Conference League anyway. But first they had to deal with the Europa League, and they drew RZ of the Netherlands and pulled off a bloody miracle, winning home and away against the Dutch club. 2-0 at home, 4-3 in the Netherlands to fly through to the playoff round of the Europa League qualifiers, incredibly, which then of course guaranteed them passage to the big group in some manner. If they lost the next round, they'd go in the Conference League. If they won, God forbid, they'd go into the Europa League, the last thing we really wanted at this stage. So then naturally they got possibly the easiest draw imaginable against Rijeka of Croatia, and they beat them home and away. A 2-1 victory in Croatia, a 1-0 victory at home. They've actually managed to win 4 in a row in the Europa League qualifiers, and that of course meant that they went into the Europa League group and not the Conference League group. And you might be thinking, surely that's a good thing. Yeah, it's just not though, because the actual monetary gain difference between Europa League and Conference League is not actually that great, and a lot of it is made up for the fact that if you're in the Conference League, you're going to win more games anyway, so you're going to make up the difference in prize money, because in the Europa League, you're not going to win as many games. So I actually find that you make more money out of the Conference League often, and you get more coefficient points, which is actually what matters. So naturally, when we didn't want the luck, we got it, and Hamren were into the Europa League groups for the first time. But I suppose the one sort of bright spark in this is that it shows that they're good enough to qualify for the Europa League groups, and that gives me hope for what they could do later in this save, if they're already this good. Especially as they then went and did this. They qualified out of their Europa League group, which we, after the way it started, did not think would happen. I'm going to move my camera so you can actually see these results a little bit better. They may have only scored 5 goals, but they beat Young Boys at home and Ghent away from home. Most notably this Ghent here, obviously Genk are down here as well. It was great results. Then they also got draws against Midtjylland, Sturm Graz and Apoel. Very solid draw against Midtjylland, which is actually what qualified them on the final day. The most disappointing thing for me was they lost to Rangers and they lost to Malta. It happens, but they also lost 4-0 at home to Georgian side Dinamo Batumi. The easiest game that they had in the entire thing. It was the Georgian club's only win in the entire tournament. Hamren absolutely should have won that. It was a catastrophe. And had they actually managed to get that result, they would have finished top half and got a better draw. But the fact that they even qualified out of their group in any way is a genuine shock, and I think it shows that they are genuinely starting to improve now to a really healthy level. That of course set them up for a draw in the next round, where they will play Reims of France, a team they've actually faced before in the qualifiers for the Conference League, and remarkably pulled off the mother of all victories, coming from behind in the home leg with Miroslav, of course, and it was Lucic in there too, and Armando Perez, who I can tell you now is actually signing for Hamren permanently this summer as well, which is fantastic news. They got that 2-1 advantage, but I just didn't feel like they were able to hang on, and we were kind of right. It was a 2-0 defeat in France. It honestly could have been so much more. I don't know if I can actually even show you the... No, I can't anymore because we're too far into the future. But needless to say, it was a strong performance from Reims. There was no way Hamren were going to win that. They created like 3.5 XG and Hamren had nothing. But a bloody good showing in the Europa League from them is at least something. So as for the coefficients, despite all of that goodness, we actually only end up getting 8.5 points this year. Part of that comes from our lack of points in the group stage. We were a few short there as well. The dilution has definitely obviously had a factor in that. Like in a normal season, if we were just doing the 5-point dilution, you can see that we'd probably be above 10, or at least, well, maybe not above 10, but we'd certainly be close to 10 with the dilution being taken away. Not to mention the fact that Hamren, if they were in the Conference League, would have got a few more points. Maybe would have got through some knockout rounds. You know what it is. We still managed to improve on the year that we're losing. The issue is, and we don't lose any ground. Well, we do lose a little bit of ground to Belgium, but they don't gain any places on us, which is the main thing. We stay 12th. Next year, though, is a real problem because we're losing a 13.5-point season. And I don't see how we're going to be able to make that up. And that is that next year is the first year that we actually count as the 12th place side. So we get this instead of this. And that's a big deal because one, it means we move a further round, which we really don't care about. But the real key thing is what it does for the Europa League and Conference League qualifiers. It means we're guaranteed a team in the Europa League playoff, which means essentially there's a guaranteed Conference League slot waiting for, I believe in this case, it's going to be Hamren. The other good news is that I trust Sweetie to drop down a little bit more successfully, or actually the same way that Hamren did, and there's every chance that Sweetie could end up in the Conference League very easily. They don't have to win one round of qualifiers at some point to get Conference League 2. So I think 3 teams in the groups is not really beyond us next year. We also get an extra team in the Europa League next year as well. I'm not sure exactly which round this is. I think it's the second round, but it weirdly doesn't say, and I don't really know why, which means there's at least them going to be in the third round of the Conference League potentially as well. I feel there's a great chance. I think 3 teams next year is a must, and I think that's very likely to happen. There is an outside shot at 4 if we get the right teams doing the right luck for once. You never really know. And if we were to get that, I think there's every chance we could put down an absolutely stellar season just with the sheer weight of numbers. But that is always going to be a story for another day. So whilst not a disaster, it's not been the greatest season imaginable. But, you know, it's all, we've got to trust the process. Our plans are measured in centuries. So that brings me to the youth intake. I'm not going to comment on the youth intake. I'm going to let me in chat comment on the youth intake. I mean, there is a Hungarian in there. I was right about the Hungarian in there. That is the worst youth intake I've ever seen. Decent talents. They're not, though, are they? So from a team stats perspective this year, you can see Henry Ouattara has been utterly godlike. He was only really thrown into the fold due to the injuries for Perez. And, I mean, 28 goals this season for Henry Ouattara. He's still only 25. I just kind of felt like Perez was the guy to take us forward, but he's done the job. Like, as much as Perez has, he's come back, but he's got 20 XG and he's only got 16 goals. He really has been kind of profligate as well as injured this season. It's not been the greatest year from him. But also, shout out to Eric Nunez. 20 goals from attacking midfield for the 22-year-old Costa Rican, who we signed on a whim. 30 goal contributions this season as well. Kwasi Awuor with 17 and 17 is brilliant. He's turned into the ultimate trequartista. He has just become that. And with 34 goal contributions this year, it's unhinged. Paez has also banged 11 goals from centre-back, and he's also been fantastic this year. Diaz, despite leaving at the end of the season, has got 11, but who needs him when we've got Eric Nunez? And on the assist front, I mean, one man stands out ahead of everybody else, and that is Uri Lahovi. 20 assists this season. And when you compare the fact that he's played nearly the same amount of minutes as Julian Palacio, in fact, slightly less minutes as it would happen, the fact that he's managed to out-assist him and basically be better in every meaningful statistic is crazy when you think how good Julian Palacio actually is. And you could see that obviously he's got him on that number, but he has him on the expected assist per 92 by a reasonably large margin. Same with the open play key passes. He's just an absolute god. And you can see the difference really between Henry Watara and Perez this year has just been their shooting accuracy, quite frankly. Their expected shots per goal are actually around about the same. It's just that shooting accuracy is where Henry's managed to flourish this season. I think that's been the main difference. That huge swing there has allowed him to be absolutely fantastic, and he's not going anywhere. He's such a useful player to have around the club. I absolutely adore him. But now let's take a little deep dive into some of the specific players that I mentioned, because, well, starting with you-know-who. Just looking at Henry Watara, you can see his attributes really haven't changed much in the last few seasons, really. And he still, surprisingly, only has 17 caps for the Ivory Coast, which just does genuinely shock me. But, like, nearly up to 100 goals in the league for us now, in all competitions. Like, 15 in the league this year, 4 in the Champions League. He did get 9 in the Cup, which has kind of buffed his numbers a little bit, but nevertheless, he's still been excellent. Nunez is another very strange one. Like, when we signed him last season, he played a few games for us, was okay. This year, he's just turned into a monster. And I don't even know why. Like, he does have very good composure, but he's not like world class or anything. He's just hit the ground running with goals. It's absolutely wild that he's managed 11 goals and 7 assists in the league. I'm not even worried about losing Gonzalo Diaz because of how good Eric Nunez has been, and I fully expect him to be able to actually step into the fold for us next season and do a relatively good job. Paez as well has had an outstanding season from centre-back. To score like 11 goals from centre-back is crazy. And now when you look at how our backline's shaping up with the likes of Paez, obviously Jozanovic, who you saw earlier, and Selim Kadri, our backline, or our standard back three, are all very young, are all very good, and I think we've got a potentially Champions League winning back three in those three alone. And with Palacio on the left / Lahovi, then with Vida, who will eventually phase out, with Krastev there too, and the depth behind that, I think our defence is really starting to take shape. Krastev also continues his development pretty nicely as well. Done a good job this year. I thought that this was the year that he would overtake Vida, but Vida's just contributed goals and assists, and he's actually outdone Vida. When you look at the comparisons here, Vida has, in the end, has actually outdone him as far as expected goals per 90 minutes. He's actually played less than Krastev, but he's got the right numbers still, and that's the main thing for me. He's also contributed 7 goals this season, which is a huge increase for him. So I'm still very happy with the way that Vida's performed for us. I think maybe next year might be the last one where he's truly successful for us, because you can see that Krastev is getting very close to him now. But Vida just keeps putting the numbers up. Last player to highlight is Juraj Lahovi. When we signed him, he was, I think he was like 2.5 star, 3.5 star. As a youngster, had some Slovakia caps, looked like he had good attributes, and we could tell that he did. But it's the development of him since then. He's just been unbelievable. I'll show you his attribute progression in a minute because he's not been here that long. But this year, he's just an assist machine. You put him in the team and he gets assists. He's actually not started a single Champions League game for us this season because he's not our starting left back. But when he gets a chance to play, he just does things. Like, to score 20 assists in 20 starts is crazy from a wing back. The model citizen is definitely helping. I'm almost always getting reports of how he's been training well. He's far. He does everything. The only thing he lacks is height. That's the one thing that Palacio has over him is height, but that crossing ability is unbelievable. And in the last, well, not 12 months, I think it's a year and it's 18 months. The fact that his marking's already gone up by 3, crossing's doing okay, balance is improving as well, positioning's up by 3, so he's getting better defensively, which is what we've got him working on. But I still think there's a little bit more that we can eke out of this guy yet, and I'm excited to see what he could become over the coming seasons. There's even this theory that we could maybe move Palacio to play as centre-back and move Lahovi out to left-back instead, so we can get both of them in the team, because Palacio is a hell of a centre-back as well, particularly as that libero. There's a lot of options for us going forward. Our defence is absolutely stacked. So now, quick little check on the Malta national team, which at the moment is actually 154th. They were briefly 153rd, and the reasons for that is very simple. They're in a tough group of qualifiers, as you can see here, but that's not the reason that they've done so well. This is the reason, in fact. Over the course of last year in the Nations League, they actually didn't get relegated from the C group. They managed to survive in the Nations League. In Nations League League C, which is genuinely a massive shock for me that they were able to do that and do it so comfortably as well with the results they got. They're actually on the cusp of being a comfortable team in there now, and they're continuing to get more and more players declaring for them. I could see a world where they actually do get promoted to Nations League B at some point, immediately get relegated, and I think the chances of them qualifying for Euros are still pretty out there, but I do wonder if there's just one campaign in this save where they actually do something cool. It'd be cool, wouldn't it? Maybe get them top 100 in the world. So someone in the last video said they wanted a bit of a staff roundup. Now, we've actually just been given some more staff slots, which we can now go about filling, but I wanted to sort of run you down kind of what we do have in terms of the attributes of some of the players. Now, obviously, when it comes to our scouting, we have the best staff in the league for many areas. There is a few areas where I feel like we could improve. One of them actually is our assistant manager, which upon looking at him, he's not very good, is he? He's really not very good. He's been here for a while, in fairness. And obviously we have Daniele Placido as our head of youth development, who is spectacular, but, you know, he can't polish a turd, can he? Medical team, much of a muchness. We probably could do with a few extra medical team people, but it really doesn't make too much difference. And you can see that we really don't have a lot of options with regards to this kind of stuff. They don't really give us many options. We could do with another physio, though. I think one of ours has just left, or he's just retired. Things are a little bit better on the recruitment side of things. You can see that we've basically got a mix of two. We've got a lot of very good, like people that just have really good judging PA and CA. We also have some people that are a bit more mid, with the idea being, well, actually less so these days. There's a few scouts here that can probably go. Most of those guys we're using purely for their knowledge, but slowly over time they'll be replaced with people that just have better, good knowledge, but also still good at the role. We don't really care too much about analysis because we never use that stuff for the most part anyway. I really should bring in a couple of, actually, do we even have the option to do that? I probably should get a few more analysts in at some point, but it's not really a big deal for me at this point. As for the loan farm, you'll see that it's actually down to minus 92 now. Now, there is a reason for that, but you'll see from this. Don't mind me with my 201 loanees. That we actually did get it to over 200 players out on loan. Now, one slight problem is that I was getting my Doff to do a lot of contract extensions, and he has a habit of doing 1+1 deals. Problem with that is you can't do 2-year extensions, and the clubs keep defaulting to 11 months. Problem with that is if you don't notice they're doing it, they end up coming back before the window in which you could extend the loans. So we've just had like 32 players come back from loan. A lot of them are going to be leaving on permanent transfers, and a lot of them just aren't very good, but it's certainly something to watch out for, I would say. But as far as players out on loan currently, we still have, I mean, Kormaji has got a very serious injury. He's just broken his leg, which is really not great at all. But the likes of Miguel Torres at Sweetie, Cheick Diarra at National Alliance. Wow, he's got really high potential now. That's intriguing. Some other guys like Michael Byrne at Melita, Ambrosio at Hibernian, a few more guys at Sweetie as well. There's a lot of players. You'll notice that Hamron actually don't have many of these guys anymore. A lot of them are moving permanently. So I think there's a good chance that Sweetie could start to really make an impact soon. Hamron are kind of just doing things on their own. As far as the top goal scorer out on loan, it's actually Christopher Dimmock, yet again. But Oliver Conan, of course, on loan at Hamron, still has 15 goals for them this season. Hasn't played that much, and they could definitely do with an improvement on that side of things. I think that we're going to see the loan farm likely drop off a little bit this year, because the plan is to hopefully start getting some higher quality players out rather than just trying to make number go bigger. Because big number is fun and all that, but it doesn't really help the save that much if we're giving loads of players like, you know, these obviously are youth players, so it doesn't really matter too much, but these guys aren't really doing too much to help. These guys kind of are, though, so I guess there's an element of both. We need to kind of balance it up a little bit, because we're sort of hitting that plateau again, where we need to start getting to the next level of some of the loans, like we were able to, so hopefully we can start to build that up, because this year's been a bit light as far as getting really high-quality players out on loan, and we need to sort of step back and have a little look at that over the course of this summer to try to get some of these youngsters that we've got that do seem to have a bit of potential out on loan, especially some of the ones that have now come back from loans. That could be a bit problematic for us. As for finances, we have £90 million in the bank. This comes obviously from those transfers and us not really spending too much money. We also got some of the budgets paid for by Barcelona. They gave us another 10 million for Tony Sunday because they owed us money for that too. They still owe us more money on that as well. So we're in a really good shop right now. We don't have, as far as I know, any real... Oh no, we've got I think that's £3 million of debt that we owe, but it's barely anything. So we're in a good spot financially right now. We can actually spend a bit more money this summer and start to bring in a few more slightly higher talented players, particularly with our increased rep. So I'm excited to do that as well. And the aim this year is simple. We want 3 teams in Europe. In the group stages, I think that's eminently possible. I think we're going to have 2 guaranteed. There's literally no way we can't have 2. I think the team dropping down from the Champions League is almost never going to lose all 3 ties. So I think 3 is pretty much locked. It's just a question of whether we could get a 4th team. 3 I would be very happy with, but 4 could actually see us improve on that year that we're losing. And that's really where things start to pick up again for us, because we're going to need to do that, because otherwise we could end up losing 12th place because Belgium are going to be on for us. Not to mention, we're going to try and win the Club World Cup. All things are still going well. I'm hoping that we can continue this form into next season and really make some stuff happen, because that loan farm does still worry me a little bit, but hopefully we can sort that out over the coming years. So if you have enjoyed this video and you want to like it, then do so. That would be very nice of you. Why did I say it like that? Like and subscribe and all that jazz. I'll see you guys over on stream. Hold your gun, capybara. Bye-bye.